So hi everyone, uh, I'm Connor from PI Fight for Affordable Housing. This is the third webinar in the Tenants Unite series. I'm just uh, trying to help PEI tenants learn how to organize uh, in their cities and neighborhoods and communities. This week we have Chiara, not sure if I might be butchering that name, um, and Bruno from the York South-Weston Tenant Union. And they're here to talk about um, how they started the York South-Weston Tenant Union, like what the first steps of organizing were. This week we're going to try a bit more of a conversational structure. So like they'll do their presentations, but after that, um, people will, I'll invite people to just kind of chat. We might even start if people are comfortable with just like introducing yourselves. Um, so feel free. Like I might do a bit of a round table of like just unmute you. Everybody should be able to unmute themselves if they're comfortable. Either say hello over the camera or in the chat. Just so we can all kind of build a bit of a expectation that we can talk to each other this time.
Cool. Thank you, Connor. Should we start now or should we give it a few more minutes?
We should be good to start now. Usually people come in pretty quick.
Okay, great. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Chiara. I live in Toronto and I am a member and founding member of the York South-Weston Tenant Union. I'm here with my partner in many things, especially tenant organizing. Go ahead, Bruno.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you. My name is Bruno. I'm also with the York South-Weston Tenant Union. I'm originally from Argentina, and I moved to Toronto almost 3 years ago. And since then, we've been doing tenant organizing here. So very, very happy to share our stories with you.
Would anybody else like to introduce themselves either through chat or unmuting?
Grant, I think you're muted.
Oh, maybe I forgot to. Everybody should have the permission.
Okay. My name is Grant Curtis. I'm in Prince Edward Island with Connor, and I've been involved for only a few months, but I'm here to learn. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Grant.
I am Stacy Dunn, and live in downtown Charlottetown, and I've been a renter for about 15 years here now.
Thank you, Stacy. We've got some folks introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you, Heather. Does anyone else want to introduce themselves? No pressure.
Hey guys, my name's Andrew. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Well, originally from PEI, living in Halifax now. I'm new to organizing, but there's a lot going on in the city that's been pretty hot lately. So it just felt like the right time to kind of get involved everywhere, especially back home with everything happening there. So nice to meet everybody.
Right on. Thank you, Andrew. We see Anne has introduced themselves in the chat. Thank you, Anne. Okay, well, what Bruno and I had in mind for today was first a kind of brief presentation, and I'll share my screen. I wanted to check in to see if anybody would prefer I use the automatic closed captioning that Google Slides has. I see Stacy nodding your head. Okay, so I'll activate that when I start the presentation. And then after that, we really wanted to open it up to have more of a conversation about organizing strategies and brainstorm some ideas with everybody here. So feel free, if you're more comfortable jumping in the chat, jump in on the chat. If you're, more comfortable unmuting yourself and asking questions that way, please do, because I think we're a group that's going to be manageable to just have a conversation that way. All right, so I will start sharing my screen if that sounds good with you, Connor.
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. I guess everybody can see my Zoom right now. Here we go. You're seeing my whole presentation starting from the end. There we go. Here's the beginning. All right. So we are the, oh, and I said I would try to do the closed captioning.
Here you have the option.
Here we go. Okay. So we are the York South-Weston Tenant Union, and we're a group of individual tenants who have joined the union as individual tenants, but we're also a group of tenant associations in a specific area in Toronto. So we're an area known as York South-Weston. It's an inner suburb of the Toronto area. And we're committed to organizing and advocating for tenant rights and the right to housing in our community. So here's a shot of some of the members of our executive. We often met at the library before COVID. So that's us hanging out in the children's section of the library. And this is the area that we organize in. And you'll notice these blue dots are the tenant association. So the members that are full buildings in York South-Weston. So there's 13 altogether, and we are growing. We had one more organize a tenant association and join during COVID. So it is possible, we can do it. And how we started, so in 2018, we actually started just by hearing about some of our neighbors going through what's known in Toronto as above guideline rent increases. I'm not sure if that's something that happens in PEI, but an above guideline rent increase that happens in Toronto or in Ontario is when a landlord raises rents above the guidelines, so above rent control, to account for capital repairs or any kind of major maintenance issues. And so a number of the buildings in our area were going through these kinds of above guideline rent increases. And so in 2018, we started in one building that reached out to us and helped them fight their above guideline rent increase. And they won a massive reduction in that rent increase. They had a very strong showing from their building. A lot of people got involved, and this is just after the hearing at the Ontario Landlord and Tenant Board meeting, where they won a huge reduction in that case. So we started really on an issue by issue base, where buildings would get in touch with us, or members or tenants in a particular building would get in touch with us about a particular issue, and we really tried to connect that issue to broader issues and the importance of organizing together. So in 2018, this particular building won a massive reduction in that AGI case, not because one person decided to go to the LTB, but because the whole building organized and came together in a way that was really strong. So that's kind of how we started. And then in 2019, we decided to get involved in a little bit more of like citywide issues around what was Toronto's housing plan going to look like for the city. And a lot of the time, tenants are left out of those, or at least in Toronto, we're finding tenants are left out of those kinds of consultations to inform these policies. And so we had a meeting in 2019 where tenant representatives from buildings all over the area came together to provide input for this housing consultation. And it was actually at that meeting that we all decided, you know what, we need to build a union, a coalition of tenants in order to have a stronger voice when it comes to informing these kinds of policies. So it was in spring, summer of 2019 where we decided, yeah, we've got a number of tenant associations, time to come together to form something of a little bit more of a formal coalition. And then in 2020, we had our first tenant summit in York South-Weston. We had over 100 tenants show up. This was in early 2020 in January. We were so pumped. We were ready to take on the world. We were really motivating meeting. And then a few months later, COVID started, which obviously gave us even more reason to continue organizing, but did pose a significant challenge for the way we were used to organizing in the past. So this is kind of a timeline of how we have started. And what we do, so we do tenant organizing, we do tenant advocacy. Bruno's going to talk a little bit about the specifics of tenant organizing. And so what I just would like to do before he does that is to talk about some of the tenant advocacy that we've done, especially during COVID. So right when the pandemic hit, we advocated for an eviction ban in Ontario. And we won that pretty quickly, actually. So by the end of March, we had an eviction ban in Ontario, which was a halt on even filing for evictions. And then that was lifted in the summertime when some of the COVID, lockdown measures were lifted as well. So we continued to fight for an eviction ban. We partnered with another tenant association or federation called the FMTA to bring back that eviction ban over the holidays. And a couple of weeks ago, it was put back in place, but this was just a halt on enforcement. So evictions could still happen at the landlord and tenant board, but they just couldn't be enforced by the sheriff. We had a rally in November along Weston Road, which is one of the main streets in our area. Again, dozens of tenants associations came out and we rallied specifically for a number of our members who were facing eviction in the area. And whenever whether it's tenant advocacy or tenant organizing, there are three key principles that I always like to repeat. And they say when you're trying to get a message across, the best way to get a message across is to repeat yourself 1,000,000 times. So the first thing I find that's been really useful in organizing tenants in our community is reinforcing this idea of you are not alone. So whether it is an eviction, whether it's mold in your building, whether it's the elevator not working, all of these issues that you are facing as a tenant, you are not facing them alone. So you're not the only one going through that problem. And we really like to reinforce that idea because it helps build solidarity amongst our neighbors. So this idea of you are not alone, it can feel so overwhelming, especially in COVID, this feeling of isolation, this feeling of just like you against your landlord all by yourself. We want to reinforce that you are not alone. And the second thing is you are stronger with your neighbors. So if this isn't an issue, if the elevator not working isn't your problem, if poor maintenance in your building isn't just your problem, if your eviction or your eviction threat isn't just your problem, especially in this pandemic, then you don't go at those problems by yourself, right? Well, you are going to be stronger with your neighbors. And so that's where we really try to organize, bring in the organizing, importance of organizing collectively with your neighbors. And the third thing is when we fight together, we win together. So we don't just organize for the sake of organizing, we organize with specific goals in place. And when we have those specific goals and we organize together, we can win together. And so there have been a number of victories. I know you've spoken to some of our fellow organizers in the city and all over the country in your first webinar. But here in York South-Weston, we've had a number of victories even during COVID. So here's a photo of some tenants who are being what we call rent evicted. Might be a term you use in PEI too, where they were being evicted during COVID because their landlord wanted to renovate their units. Though those eviction notices were withdrawn after community organizing. We did something called a phone zap to Starlight, which is a large one of the largest landlords in our area. After they were evicting some of our members, those members were allowed to stay in their homes after that action. Here we have an example earlier on in our organizing where these tenants actually received a check in the mail from their landlords because they were owed money. And here we have an example of a building actually that wasn't rent controlled. So a building that wasn't protected in rent control. Their landlord wanted to increase their rent by 25% in some cases. Landlords, the tenants came together, formed a tenant association, won a massive, massive reduction in that rent increase. So these are just some examples. There are so many examples of victories when tenants come together to organize collectively around collective goals. So now I think I'm going to pass it over to Bruno to talk about some of the specifics around tenant organizing, and then we'd like to open it up to some conversation.
Okay, yeah, if you have any questions you want to jump in, feel free to do that. I'll just quickly, just before, when we were talking with Connor, he mentioned some, at least how we do it. This is not a recipe that it's everybody has to do it this way. This is what usually works for us in terms of how we actually start organizing. What are some of the steps we take and how we try to maintain it. And this includes some things that we sometimes forget, which is having fun. We sometimes go so much around political issues and the problems we have, but we sometimes don't have enough space to have fun while we do it. And at the York South-Weston Tenant Union, we always try to make it part of the work we do to have interesting activities that involve more people, that are fun, and that can be political as well. So this is just a photo. In our community, there is a Santa Claus parade, which happens and like 3,000 people come out on the streets. All of the tenants come out. So we decided to have our own fleet with a Frozen theme. And we had Olaf saying, hey, Elsa, can you freeze our rent? And it was just a way to approach people, also make people laugh and relax a little bit. And also we could get a lot of kids from the buildings come in and participate. Just to clarify, maybe different from other places, we mostly organize large buildings, and most of our associations are buildings with 200 plus units. Doesn't mean that everybody is part of them, but we aim for that. And some people from individual like basements, can still be members, but the core of the organizing happens in those buildings against big corporate landlords. So some tips in terms of organizing on how we do it. Usually what happens is we distribute a lot of flyers. And this is perhaps my first advice is do not rely on social media for communicating with people. Social media helps with people that are already very involved. So if you want other progressives to come in and join in a for example, a phones app, that's key. Use social media, use Twitter, use Facebook, use Instagram. But in our experience, to get organizing, social media does not connect us to new people usually, and it is just flyering door by door. We used to be able to knock on every door, which is what we always did, but now we can. So we try to flyer, and we try to make the flyers every time more interactive, and I'll show you a little bit how, just to get people talking back to us, but especially people that we wouldn't reach otherwise. So one struggle during COVID was getting people who are gonna be at risk of eviction. And many times it's people who only have land phones, for example. How are we gonna reach them? So we get a flyer every apartment, and we get a flyer once a month around different issues, so that eventually they're gonna call back. And that's usually what happens. So we prepare a flyer, we try to make something catchy. A flyer does not need to have a lot of words. That's like rule number one. And we ourselves learned a lot through the process. We started kind of with long-winded editorials in the flyers and then we just simplified it a lot. Flyer every door. So if you can knock on every door, that's better. But right now we know it's not possible. So flyer on every door. And sometimes what works for us, especially with large buildings, is also to either stand outside at key hours, either early in the morning or at night when people are coming back, or at the bus stop. I know that's also when we can do it. All of us are volunteers. None of us gets paid for this, so we often, I will take flyers when I'm going to work on the bus or stuff like that. So it's always useful to do that. And you can, as you see in the photo, you can bring kids along. Flying with kids is fun. Here's an example of a recent flyer for the rally that Chiara was just mentioning, just so for you to see. So the message is very clear what it is about. It has information, and information key is email and the telephone. Often people just call us. And then the other thing that we started adding is the QR code. And that may be more foreign to some people, to younger people. You just take a photo of that with your phone and it takes you to a web page or to a way to communicate with us. So for a lot of people that are kind of on the go, we put this in the posters as well. Just take a photo of the QR code. You can create these QR code generators online that are free and they're quick, but that way it's easier for a lot of people to get in touch. And I just wanted to show you, we started doing the tenants newsletters in our community. Can you guys see there? So this is the latest one, and it's just a 4-page, very concrete newsletter that has, a message. It has a bit about us. In every page, join us, try to get people connected. It has some information. Sometimes it's about evictions, sometimes it's about rent increases, but some piece of information that people can use. This is also has an advertising about our general meeting coming up. Some stories. This is one of the tenant associations that are part of the union that decided to do a mutual aid network. They help people with food access, all kinds of assistance for seniors, and they started it themselves. So we portrayed one of the efforts. Another tenant association that we have, it's a collective of artists. So they're starting a tool library. So that's something that we're going to put in the next one. Some information about the rent freeze, some actions. And then at the end, we have a tenant crosswords. We know a lot of people just like to do crosswords, and this is a way you can engage. So if you finish a crossword, you can just take a photo, send it to us, and you may win a prize. So that's just an example of something that is engaging, that is fun, that people like to do, and maybe it will be done by people that do not really care about tenant issues, but through the crosswords, they might, engage in it. So those are just some examples of how to organize and engage people. So the first thing is then reaching to people like that through flyers mostly, or through public places that you can do it. Right now, knocking on doors for us is not possible. People are afraid. Buildings in particular have a higher rate of infections. So it's something kind of out of the table for us now, but we still do the outside ones. Then get together, that's kind of the flyers. We try to always have an action, and the action, it's either come to a rally, come to a meeting. This is a meeting connection. If you have questions, call us here, sign this petition. Always try to get them to do something when they read the flyer. And the meetings, we often are having them through Zoom right now. In the summer and in the spring, when the weather was nicer, we would do them in front of the buildings. There is something about doing the meeting in person in front of the building, which is that the building management finds out as well. And it's great. The building management gets usually worried when they know tenants are organizing. So it's something that we want to do. And we let people know that, this may lead to some managers being a little more aggressive towards you. You might not get the repairs you thought you were getting right away, but it's actually a show of power as well. And in those meetings, it's just important to have somewhat of a plan what you want. So we get together, what do we want? We want to discuss what's going on about a specific issue. We want to join a bigger campaign and start thinking about what are the power structures that you can organize with. So how many tenants do we have here? Let's say the first meetings are usually small. So we have 10 people. How do we get to 20? How do we get to half of the building? How many people do we know that are not in this meeting? Okay, let's make a plan. So Chiara knows Johnny from the other flat that didn't come. Okay, Chiara will bring Johnny to the next. And mapping that is actually important, making a list. of who's not here, who do we need to have in the meeting. And always try to schedule a follow-up. Never leave a meeting without a follow-up and with some items on the agenda, like, okay, in 2 weeks, what do we want to do? We want to contact we want to double the number of people that meet. Let's do that. Let's put that as an aim. But that's important to just keep things moving. Otherwise, it's easy to lose a way, you know? Yeah, and then execute an action. It's always important to try to keep an action. An action doesn't need to be, in our experience, just, you know, a rally, or the ideal, you know, final action would be a rent strike. For us, I know you heard from other groups, for us it has been really difficult to get to a rent strike, just because the level of commitment that you need in a building, you need, we think, a vast majority of a building to have a successful rent strike. And we were kind of caught in COVID, and it was always very difficult to do that through COVID, to get majority participation in that. But we've done trainings around evictions with legal clinics, mappings of the landlords. Who are the landlords? Where do they have their investments? Who are our allies? Who could be our allies? Petitions. Petitions sometimes work to pressure local politicians, so directed specifically at an MP or a councillor. Bigger petitions depends, you know, sometimes you use petitions to get people involved and to get them doing something. It's not a bad, you know, way to get people moving. Letters to the landlords, outreach to the community. So that example that Chiara was mentioning, that we managed to stop the eviction of tenants in a small building. So something we did, we actually printed flyers and we walked and canvassed all of the streets around those buildings with the tenants, explaining neighbors who were not tenants in their majority, they were homeowners, why these tenants are so important for our community. When the landlord found out that we had, you know, basically the neighbors were already on board, that led to a lot more pressure on that landlord. So those are some ideas, something fun. So in our AGM, for example, in our meetings, we will have trivia, and the trivia is mixed. You know, some trivia is just fun events, and some trivia is very tenant related, to get also people thinking, similar as with the crossword. And then just a fourth final kind of suggestion is to have an evaluation. And this is something that we don't do well, but we should do much more. So we set some goals. How are we doing? What do we need to change? How do we need to improve? And just be conscious that don't try to put goals that are difficult to meet. Just put goals that you think you may be able to meet, especially if everybody's doing this voluntarily on their own time. So it's important to keep that in mind, not to overburn yourself, but evaluate those goals and see, did we have as many people as we thought? Maybe we aimed for too many. Maybe this flyer is not working. We need to do something else. Yes, and stuff like that. So those are just some things. And then, yeah, as I said, during COVID, we did a lot of organizing outside in the summer, meetings outside. Those worked a lot. This is our previous newsletter that we started distributing during COVID, and it has worked a lot. People keep it. People contact us about issues that we mentioned. And then we partnered with some local community organizations to do live streamings so this, in this case, was a mix between spoken word and tenant rights. It was a mix. It was called Weston is Home. So we had some spoken word artists, and in the middle, Chiara and Charlene will come in and speak about tenant rights. So those are just some ideas, is how we do the organizing. I've just now stopped talking and open it up to questions, comments, suggestions. Everything is welcome.
Stop sharing.
Question, feel free to unmute yourself. Let me know if anybody can't unmute themselves. Or,
I have a
just
question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question about your newsletters. They're great looking newsletters. So maybe you can describe in detail where you got them printed and how you mail them out, especially in the time of COVID.
So, great question. Just remember, this is zero funding. So actually COVID has helped us out. Now we have some more support from local community organizations. So the first batch of the newsletter or the flyers, we would just all chip in and print it. Luckily, we have a big printer in our home that just stayed from other things that we did, and we recycle the printer. We just print black and white, so I show you the color one, but it's black and white, the ones that goes to the doors. Chiara is an amazing designer. It's not her job, but she doesn't like doing it, but she does it. So that helps.
They're nice looking.
They're
very
nice looking. Yes. And then we just get ideas from people. So the crossword idea came out in our last meeting that we say, hey, what if we put the crosswords? And then someone went online and there are sites where you can just kind of type in the words and then it gives you a crossword. So it's very easy to do it word specific to what you want. And then you put the definitions. Printing. So the printing, we now have partnered with community groups, established organizations. Usually asking them to print is not a big thing for their budgets. We sometimes, go a bit overboard when we call them. We're like, hey, can you print 2,000 flyers? And they're like, oh, okay. So they start connecting us. I can print 500 here, 700 here, and we just kind of gather as we go. But that's key. And one thing so in terms of, we're very local. So this is one area of Toronto. So in that sense, local health clinics, for example, are now, this last flyer was printed with their support because they said, look, we cannot really go into buildings. We don't want to expose our workers. So since you're distributing your newsletter, can you add this information about COVID testing into it? And we're like, yeah, sure. So they printed flyers for us and we included that. We do that, not like if a pizza place wanted to promote pizza, we wouldn't do it. Although we do have a member who eats a pizza flyer delivery. He gets paid for delivering flyers or pizza, but he delivers flyers of the tenant union on the side. We're not going to disclose his name so he doesn't get into trouble.
With regards to distribution, though, Stacy, we're not mailing them. So we usually have one tenant leader in each building that will go and slide it under everybody's doors. And if those tenants need, masks or face shields or gloves or sanitizer or anything like that in terms of PPE, the tenant union will collectively pool our resources to get those for them. So we are not paying for postage. One day maybe we'll have be institutionalized enough where we could pay for postage, but it is very much so a very low budget kind of distribution. And the local organizations have been very helpful in getting us the number of flyers we need or newsletters that we need printed. And it has been, I've been surprised. It's been a very easy ask. They're like, well, we don't have any money, but if you want us to print off, a couple hundred newsletters, we can do that. And then we'll spread them out. Everybody will take turns folding and getting them ready. We'll drop them off to different buildings so that the person in that building can then go and give it to all of their neighbors.
And just one thing in terms of distribution, it is a great way to get people involved with a very simple ask. So sometimes when you start organizing and people get a little bit afraid that it might be too much or they might not have confidence in their leadership capacity, I don't know, it happens. So saying, hey, can you distribute, can you just put one every door? Will you mind doing that? You can do it, late at night when people are not circulating so that you're not exposed. It's anyways in your building. And people are very willing to do it. Usually, actually, that's when people contact us and they say, hey, I live in this building and I heard about you. They might not even say, I want to form a tenant association, but they might say, I want to get involved in some way. That's my first ask is, that's amazing. How many units do you have? Okay, 200 units. How do you feel about distributing this flyer? And in the meantime, they'll read the flyer as they distribute. So it kind of works that way. It's really helpful it's a very simple ask. And I would recommend before thinking of posting through Canada Post or anything like that, try to do it yourself for the first few times to build that momentum. And then, maybe later.
Great, thank you.
no problem.
What are some of, I'm curious to know, what are some of the housing issues that you're facing in PEI? Like what's motivated everybody to come to this meeting? Or if you had questions for me, ask me a question too.
We probably have similar issues to what you have, really.
Right.
Our vacancy rate is about the same as Toronto. It's there's a real shortage of low cost, affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
There's renovations going on us, and there's a general, there's a lot of building going on to build big homes, not to build, and the government is not keen to really enter into producing a lot of public housing. And what else, Stacy? You're muted.
Stacy, you're
The
muted.
chat. You look at the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, units going with a maintain legal rent increases.
Yes. Yeah.
30-year-old Residential Properties Act. So,
Yeah.
do most of you live in buildings, in houses? How is that?
I live in a house.
House.
Yeah, a lot of people, there's very few big buildings on PEI. Like
Mm.
the biggest would probably be like 24 units, something like that.
Right. Right. So that's a
That's
very
what it
different.
is. I was going to ask about all those units in York Southwest or Weston. Are they owned by the same company or different companies?
So it varies. There are definitely, I'd say, 3 landlords that dominate the area, and the biggest one is by far Starlight. They've been buying up a lot of the buildings on Weston Road because rental properties are so profitable. The turnaround for that building to be, that investment to become profitable is a number of years, and then they've made all their money back and then some, right? So Starlight is our biggest landlord. After that, Capri, which you might have in PEI as well, or you might have Starlight as well in PEI, but they do tend to be kind of bigger buildings.
Carpete.
Right.
Yeah.
Capri. And then we have a number of smaller, landlords that are perhaps low-rise buildings or individual landlords. And I guess it's varied, but the vast majority of our members are from large high-rise buildings that are corporate, very large corporate landlords that nobody really knows who's the face of. So that poses a different challenge. Sometimes when you know the name of your landlord, it's a lot easier to pressure that individual. These big corporations that are just real estate investment companies are sometimes a lot more difficult to nail down. But it is, it is interesting to kind of compare the different ways. Perhaps in PEI, we find the tenant associations, so the buildings that you can really foster a sense of community because it's so place-based. And so if everybody's spread out a lot more, that kind of causes a little bit more of a challenge for building up that sense of community solidarity. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. And that may be something that you might want to do is instead of building tenant associations, maybe like neighborhood tenant associations where you have those kinds of more place-based. Throwing it out there. I see Michelle nodding your head.
Yeah. I think that you're right. We're just so much on so much more of a smaller scale. I think that our highest buildings in Charlottetown are no more than 6 stories. And that's only recent that they've started to be able to build. So it is much smaller scale. And we probably have fewer of the huge corporate But I noticed one of the things that we're looking at right now is, and that you mentioned as an important thing, is to do this mapping. And that's, I think, our next, one of our next steps. Right, Connor, we were talking about that at the PEI FAH, to look at mapping, you know, the rentals and the housing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
No, that's all I had to say.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say on the mapping that sometimes it's also important to map the tenant side.
Yes.
To see where you're at. Something that we haven't yet really started to do, but it's something we want to start, is it's kind of like a survey when we meet and ask people, what do they do with their, are they a member of the union? Are they members of a religious organization? Are they member of other community groups? Because that starts, you get a sense of your allies on that,
Yes.
potential allies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I just see from the chat, Pocket McDonald is saying something that I think it's important. She says, or he, I'm not sure. I admit that I'm lucky that my landlord and I are on first name basis. We're neighbors, and it creates the issue of I don't not wanting your landlord to know that you're starting a tenant coalition. We are actually, we're also tenants in a shared house, so we are in that situation. Our landlord is, I think that in a way, and we're on good terms. It usually means that they think it twice before taking any kind of advantage. I think it makes them more careful, not less friendly, and it's good to, but it's good to make that distinction between small landlords and bigger ones. Smaller landlords, I would say, usually easier to pressure in terms of community. I think it might give you more as a group. It may give you more tracking. Definitely, yeah. But there is that personal. We had a case with one that we did a phone up, and we called the guy, and he was just it was two owners. One of them was very angry that we were bothering him. He wanted to renovate his tenants, and then the other one was the investor. He was worried about his image in the community, so he backed down and said, "Okay, they can stay.
Sorry.
We'll just work around the work."
Mm.
I do think that idea of, I see Andrew. Actually, I'll stop. Andrew, go ahead.
Oh, I'll let you finish and then I'll pop in right after.
Just to reinforce mapping on both sides. So when we do our tenant associations buildings, like, we know the name, what unit, how many floors we have a representative on. And so that kind of, it's tedious, but it's really important, especially if you're building towards an action that's going to require everybody or the vast majority of tenants to be on board, or just to gauge how effective and how engaged is your tenant association in that particular building. And so the same thing could be said for the way you're working on mapping out where are the tenants in Charlottetown, where are the tenants in PEI, and I can't emphasize this enough. Getting a phone number and contact information, but especially a phone number now that it's more difficult to do that one-on-one knocking on doors. Getting a phone number for people to call them back later and have that like human to human connection makes a world of difference. Bruno's a big fan of flyering, but we flyer in order to get someone on the phone with us. You know, we want to be able to talk to someone. We want them to know our name. We want to know their name. And that is really important in building the trust that's going to come and the community that comes with doing this kind of work. Go ahead, Andrew.
Cool. So essentially what I was kind of wondering, and I guess what you just said sort of answers that in terms of mapping and stuff, but where I'm living in Halifax, I live in like a very subdivision-y-esque area. Most of the people surrounding me, most of my neighbors all own their own houses. No one really deals with landlords, but my house in particular is owned by a bigger company. I'm not entirely sure how many properties they have, but from the looks of their Facebook and website, it looks like a decent amount of high-end properties. And we kind of just get shafted in a lot of ways. Like my door frame in my garage, which is also doubling as like a recording studio for me and some friends, has rotted out, and we messaged him to have it replaced, and he just responded with noted. And we've had no response or like urgency to fix it by any means. So I've like taken it upon myself to fix it a bit. But like in terms of like community organizing, I'm at a bit of a loss. Where like we don't really have that many allies around. But again, mapping kind of plays into that answer.
Yeah, maybe I would check where does he advertise his properties, and then find out which properties are and drop a flyer in each of them. Not obviously when they're empty, but once you wait a bit and then drop a flyer and say, hey, we are under the same landlord, why don't we get together, or call us, something like that. Maybe there's power in numbers.
Fair, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. But just on the individual landlord, it is, I mean, I understand that we want to keep good relationships, and sometimes in the big buildings it happens with the, I can say the name now, superintendent. So people don't want to piss off the superintendent, who is kind of the more daily representative of the landlord. But the good relationships last until they don't. That's the issue. So ideally you want to try to, maybe you don't have a specific issue yourself, but just getting involved in a community of tenants already builds your confidence, and if something happens, you have people to back you up as well. And I think that's what justifies it. And if your landlord is worried, well, let them be worried, but it's kind of a tool for self-defense in a way.
And to kind of go back to that idea of not wanting to ruin the relationships, one of the things that I always like to say to folks who are starting to organize is that it isn't always in response to something bad. Becoming a collective or a coalition of tenants in PEI or in Charlottetown or in this neighborhood in Charlottetown isn't because you always want to take up arms with your landlord or with the city of Charlotte. No, sometimes it's just because, you want to help build community and foster community. So when we, some of the most exciting and perhaps community-based events that are happening are because the tenant associations are planning them, right? So the Santa Claus parade that we participated in, everybody loved. It was the float was the highlight of the Santa Claus parade because it was funny. It spoke to who, was watching the Santa Claus parade. Everybody got information about their rights as tenants with candy canes. So it doesn't always have to be negative. It is really a great way to build community and get to know your neighbors. And so that's what sometimes people have this idea of, oh, if you start a tenant association, it means because you want to go on a rent strike and you're going to be like protesting everything all the time. And that's sometimes necessary. Like sometimes that is exactly what the end goal is. But sometimes and often it's about just looking out for one another and having a coalition of neighbors that are looking out for each other.
Have you ever had a landlord threaten eviction for simply forming a tenant union? Eviction, I don't know, maybe. I mean, landlords have threatened us, not our landlord, but we have as a union. Yeah, that happens. And kind of, maybe that brings me back to the issue of inoculation. That sounds like a turn. The first meeting, usually when you're trying to, it's important to make people aware that there are repercussions not to scare them, but to make them aware that this may, that things like that could happen, and that you have a right to organize, that you have a right to form a tenant association, and the landlord cannot evict you for forming a tenant association. It's very different to unions, in which sometimes when you're trying to form a union, they can dismiss you from your work, which I think should be illegal anyways. But that cannot happen with housing. They cannot fire, dismiss, evict you from your house for that. So in that small way, we have an advantage. But the first meeting with new people, just as a group, to say it's important to know that, landlords may know about this, and that this is just something that could happen, that you get a threat like that. But the moment you get any kind of threat, share it with the rest, and that can be a tool to, some threats you can even take them to court, but just in general, to use it to pressure back on them. I think if they threaten to evict you, it's already a sign that it's good that you're forming a tenant association.
I would say, just as another very small tip, in Ontario, the law that regulates landlords and tenants is called the Residential Tenancies Act. I know it has a different name for you in PEI. What I do, if we're organizing a building that we suspect there's going to be a potentially hostile landlord, so maybe tenants were already trying and couldn't because the landlord, I do print, it's a very simple tip, but this is what this is about. I print off the part of the RTA, the Residential Tenancy Act, that says it is illegal to prevent tenants from organizing a tenant union or tenant association. So I print that off. I keep it in my back pocket just in case we need it. We've only ever needed to use it once or twice. And it's the part that also says how much is the fine, how much can they get convicted if they, and it's a very, very simple thing to kind of have in your back pocket in case you need it. Doesn't need to be presented aggressively. It's just like, oh, I hear your concerns about this because we're meeting in front of your building. We're allowed to do this. And just as a reminder, I've got some information I can give you about how come we're allowed to do this in the Residential Tenancies Act. Every time I've done that, they've stepped away. So does it mean they've liked us anymore afterwards? No, not necessarily, but it is something that I keep in the back of my pocket. It's usually, like Bruno said, when something like that happens, it's usually because we're in a building or perhaps dealing with a landlord where absolutely the tenants need to be organizing together to have like decent standards of housing being met. So but recommended it be included in the new act that's under development. That's great. I mean, that sounds like there's a huge opportunity for kind of wider spread advocacy happening in PEI. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Hi. So there is a new Residential Tenancy Act being developed, and that's one of the things we have been encouraging people to take part in the consultation process, which I think is over now. Well, actually, they're going to start a new one now, but oh, I see the stove is going in the background.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah. So cozy.
Yeah, it was freezing in here a minute ago. So yeah, it's been sort of under discussion for about a year or so now, and that was one of our sort of one of the things we did before the pandemic. I think was to get in touch with a lot of different organizations and people to see if they wanted to participate in the consultation, and sort of we had spent a lot of time. I guess this was during the pandemic. We had spent a lot of time coming up with our own recommendations and shared those with whomever we could, and encouraged people to take part. But I like the idea of like, that's something positive that community can do, as you were saying. You don't necessarily need to organize around a specific problem or challenge, but it could be something like that's really positive in nature. And yeah,
or you can have both. Sometimes it's useful to have the big community issue, So as an example, during COVID, we had the no COVID evictions campaign that was kind of for everyone, even homeowners sometimes agreed. And then, yeah, specific issues were on, we didn't have to engage everybody on it. But I think in the case of what you're talking, I think it's a good opportunity to bring people together about even just to learn that this is happening, right?
Yeah. And as Robin says, like the landlords actually, have formed their own association, partly, I think, so that they have a stronger voice in the development of this legislation. So I think it makes it even more important for some kind of, community organization of tenants to be speaking out about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. When the landlords start out organizing us, there's going to be a problem. So definitely time to gear up and ramp up some community response to that. But it sounds like that would be a great way for outreach. So Bruno and I spoke about the No COVID Evictions campaign. We did have a petition, and we presented that to the province. The petition served two things. And so a petition perhaps with your recommendations for the legislative changes that you'd like to see to the RTA has the purpose of, showing your MPPs, I think that's what they might be called or your
MLAs,
look how many people support these recommendations. But the other thing that's really important, and that's perhaps sometimes even more useful, is that you start drawing people into your organization, and identifying and finding out who are those people, right? Where are they? Because when you sign a petition, you put your name to something, right? And you put your postal code at the very least. And if it's a virtual one, you put your email. So with the No COVID Evictions petition, that really took off for us. And we ended up getting in touch with hundreds of new tenants in the area who got in touch with us because of that petition. And so then it becomes a matter of following up with them. So the petition is good because you can present it to MLAs, but it's also good because you can follow up with people and say, hey, thank you so much for signing this petition. We presented it to our MLAs, and this is what we're thinking of for next steps. And that's important because the signing a petition is like the first step. Thank you for, you took that first step. This is our next step to making sure that housing rights are protected for tenants like us in the province.
Yeah. I think they may have changed. Virtual petitions definitely weren't accepted a while, traditionally in PEI, but I have a feeling that may have changed. I've seen one or two.
What you can do as well is just put up your own website with a petition, and then collect everything and print it an Excel sheet at the end of the day. And if it's only it doesn't necessarily need to be one by one going to, you can just say, okay, every 2 weeks we'll print it and take it and make it fast. Well,
yeah, but I think she means they needed to have a physical signature
that
someone signs, which is,
I think it may not be now.
Too.
Yeah.
I think some changes were made because of COVID around what can be accepted. But even if officially the legislature won't accept it, if all of the MLAs start seeing, oh my goodness, there's 200 postal codes here in my constituency that have signed a virtual petition about this, it could have the same impact of persuading an MLA, even if it's not under the official format that the legislature will accept. That's what we've found, especially when we do targeted campaigns for local politicians.
I think we did do a petition grant. Do you, or Leo, maybe, do you remember or Michelle, the short-term rental one? But I honestly can't remember what we did with it. So.
This is Leo. I'm trying to remember as well, because for some reason I'm not having having it come through. But there's certainly a huge popular demand that people were supporting this, especially in neighborhoods where they were impacted right, by all the STRs that were there.
Yeah.
But and so we got a wide support for theirs.
Yeah, and it does make sense to get people's contact information, but also it gives people something to do, you know, to take the petition around or to sit outside the farmers market and get signatures, that sort of thing. So it's kind of an easy intro.
I remember with the Black Lives Matter petition, and I remember hearing about it through Facebook, and they said where they would be at different locations at different times. And I remember, you know, making a note of it that, yeah, I will go to the park, you know, after 4 o'clock on a Friday to, you know, to sign the petition. And people there had masks on. And so it was, you know, it was well organized that way with, you know, safe distance and everything. So, and masks. So I thought it really went well.
I see Heather has to peace out, but so thank you, Heather, for joining. I just wanted to make a comment. Was it Robin who said, so you have 350 people who signed your short-term rentals petition. Is there a way to recontact those people? Did they leave like an email or a phone number? So there,
or an address to give them the first flyer of the coalition,
and add them to your map. That's like a great, strong,
that's a lot of people, yeah,
basis to start mapping out. Beautiful, to start mapping out who else you could reach. Oh wow, I'm reading the chat as I'm talking, and then I cannot stress how positive the response is when you contact someone who's signed a petition. Every single time I've picked up the phone, even if the news was bad, even if we didn't get what we wanted from the petition, but I took the time to say, hey, Jane, thank you for signing this petition. You took the first step towards this. It didn't pass this time, but this is the next thing that we're doing, and I want to invite you to be part of it. The response has always been, wow, I've never, ever found out what happens after I've signed a petition before. And so then remember that like person-to-person connection? Everybody I've talked to has loved that phone call or that follow-up email if they've just left an email. But that personal touch really makes a huge difference, and it makes them all right. And they've already taken a first step. So then having a second step for them to take after you follow up, even if it wasn't successful, we weren't successful this time, but we're having a meeting next week over Zoom. We want you to be part of it because we're planning next steps.
I gotta head out to, I gotta go distribute flyers actually. So great to be with all of you. We'll be in touch. I'll leave you with Chiara.
Yeah, have a good night. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So I know we said
thanks very much. Yeah. I appreciate the conversation we're having and ideas that are forming. So it's good. And I'm just trying to think of how can we do this in Charlottetown? And it almost seems like if we could like adopt a block or something, each of us, and try to make sure that within that block or something, we can just try to reach out to the renters in that area to sign a petition. I think that the property owners and landlords are may want to lobby to weaken legislation that's proposed.
Yeah.
So I think we should have petitioned to try to make the legislation as strong as possible, including even stronger than what it is right now. That might be a petition that people would respond to. I'm just thinking out loud.
I think that's good. I think we should also get Stacy Dunn to write a newsletter for us.
One of the things that we're thinking about, and we'll let you know how effective it is, but we have ways to kind of gauge engagement. So the sign up sheet from our newsletter goes to a specific URL that's only connected to our newsletter, so we get to see how many people are signing up because of the newsletter. But one of the other things that we thought about, and this goes back to like, okay, let's have fun as well. With the tenant crossword, we were thinking, you know, send us a photo of your completed crossword for a chance to win something, right? Like making it a little bit of a contest to see if people are doing it, right? We leave them, we know our members are doing them and they're giving them out to their friends and reading every word, but it's interesting. We're in the process of gauging how. We had a number of people reach out this time around with this newsletter. We've just started distributing it, and I think about a dozen or so have actually called because of the newsletter. So, but I'm curious to know, you know, who are all the other people who are receiving this and what are they doing with it? So when we get a better idea, we'll share that with you. But I think the newsletter is a great way. It's also a great way to engage other people to sending contributions.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm still kind of reeling from the idea of that spreadsheet. I think,
Did we just lose?
oh, I think she did. No, maybe she disconnected.
I can't really hear you very well, Connor.
Is this any better? Or,
No.
not really sure what would be going on. And still bad?
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that would be.
Are you?
I'm
There you
back.
are.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. It's for
Wondered where you
somebody
went.
signed into our account, I think, from another computer, and it kicked me.
Oh, okay.
But I do, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for tenant organizing PI. If you're in the process of putting forward a new tenant landlord legislation, it's one of those, you don't often get these opportunities to really make a solid difference. Ours has been amended every once in a while. But if you're in the process of going through that, I think that's a great opportunity to get people involved. Connor, you look like you're about to say something.
Oh yeah, no, I'm still kind of just like, I've been trying so hard to get names and addresses, and somebody just has like 3 times as many names as me.
Sorry, what did you say?
Question.
Oh.
A quick question about, I know we're talking mostly about provincial legislation and getting in touch with MLAs, but I want to know what's your experience in Toronto with like you're contacting your MMPs, but sure that there's issues that are just for Toronto City Council. So what advice do you have for us to, you know, how to approach City Council and then how to approach our province or provincial government?
That's a great question. And I have an example. I always like to lead with victories. They're not always, you know, but what happened in Toronto and in Ontario was do you have rent control in PEI? I'm not sure if you do. Yes. So we used to have rent control for all buildings, but then when Doug Ford got elected, he eliminated rent control for buildings built after 2018. So now new buildings aren't protected by rent control. And so we have one building in our tenant association, hundreds, close to 400 units, is not protected by rent control. And that was the building that put in that 25% rent increase. Outrageous.
Yes.
And the tenants in that building organized, and connecting kind of their particular building struggle to a wider city issue is that even though the province eliminated rent control, there is a real effort to pressure our local city councillor to make sure that when the city of Toronto is building housing, so and is giving up public city-owned land for building housing, that the city mandate these need to be rent controlled. So we're not just we don't just give our public owned land away and then, you know, they can build housing and it won't be rent controlled. We pushed really hard for our city councillor to mandate that it be rent controlled. And so we didn't win 100% rent control, but we did win a cap that was going to prevent a situation that happened again from happening in the future with another building. So that's kind of, it was a workaround, but absolutely, Stacy, city council, especially when it comes to particular developments or we have something called the building standards that the city is responsible for enforcing. Another program that just started, which is Rent Safe TO, so Rent Safe Toronto, which is a program that tracks landlords. All of that is policy and advocacy that happens at the city level. So there are all kinds of opportunities to do things like that at the city level. And because we're such a local group, we actually tend to take up more of those very local opportunities for advocacy, more so than the provincial.
Right.
Connor is shook by my spreadsheet. Look at that. Robin, you've got a gold mine right there. This is the foundation of your outreach.
Yeah,
Any
so
other thoughts? Like, I'm available all night. I love talking about this, but I know we planned for about an hour and a half, so I'm open to continuing. If other ideas come up, I'm interested in hearing more about how things are going in PI.
I'm just trying to think of anything.
I love the float idea in terms of getting attention to people and doing it in a novel way. So I thought as well, if we're doing a petition or something like this, it is a way of gathering information. And maybe from that, we could even have people fill it out on whatever issue it is. And then if we had conversations enough to find out which landlords they were with or what their concerns were, because I think the general public shares are concerned that there's a housing crisis here and all levels of government are kind of dragging their feet. So whatever level of government we can push would be good.
Right on. I agree, Leo. We feel those feet dragging here in Toronto as well. And it is definitely every level of government has to take responsibility for the right to housing. And we need to start thinking of it as that way. We need to start thinking about housing and making sure our politicians think about housing like they think about education and healthcare. You know, you can't just not let a kid go to school. Everybody gets to go to school. That's just the way it is. And everybody should be allowed to have a safe place to live. That should just be the way it is, right? I would just say we started through a consultation process too, right? So that first consultation that happened in 2019, we were invited to we got all of our tenant friends together to participate in a consultation for the new housing plan in Toronto. And it was at that meeting that about 40 of us were there, decided, you know what, we need to start something bigger and create a coalition that'll give tenants like us a platform. So I'm excited. I think there's lots of opportunities coming up for you in PEI. I can see that you're a great group. And it starts with a group like this. That's how we started.
Yeah, that gives me a thought of the Fight for Affordable Housing has a draft of how they'd like the act to change. I'm just trying to think of ways we could leverage that because it's not necessarily a petition, but like, do you think it'd be worthwhile to almost do flyers of the draft revisions to the act so people could see if they like this or not, and then like sign a petition supporting it or a letter supporting it?
I think we did something like that. We actually designed a flyer that had that really focused on 3 or 4 points. I think, Grant, you were involved in that, right? in the that we were recommending be included in the new act.
Think we ever actually printed them off.
Did we ever print it though? Yeah. It sounds like we're really slow. I think it was
COVID.
COVID. I blame COVID for sure. So I think that's what happened. And the other thing is that the province wasn't really clear on what their consultation process was going to be or how long it was going to be. So we just learned fairly recently that they're doing more consultation now. So this might, Connor, I think you're right. This could be a really good time to sort of revive that, the flyer, and use it to this purpose. That's a really good idea.
I think real estate is quite a valuable thing in everywhere, but particularly in PEI. We had a local city election, and the old mayor stepped down, and he's now selling real estate. And our local councillor, he lived just down the street. I live in the suburbs, and Greg Rivard moved out of our neighborhood to better grounds. So I think, and other indications of, some houses are up for sale like every 6 months. Somebody will fix something up and then try and sell it. And there's lots of real estate signs around the neighborhood. A lot of people moving, and there's PEI's population is about 140,000, and I went to a University of Prince Edward Island talk, and this guy was a former government employee, and he was discussing the ability to get your property designated as a building lot. And there were 30,000 of them approved beyond what was actually built on. So, and these houses are along highways and things like that. They're not so much in towns.
Right.
Some people want to move out of the city and live along the highways that lead into Charlottetown. We have two large cities, Summerside and Charlottetown. They're not large by Toronto standards, but they do have many of the same problems. Water's an issue here as a resource. Climate change is a big issue that ties into property. My one daughter.
Do you have an issue with flooding in PEI and basement flooding? Or not?
At times, yeah, we do get there's a lot of wet basements in Charlottetown, especially in the older sections and near some of the aquifers.
I think that's one of the things we do hear from tenants is around mold and inaction on that kind of thing.
Well, the connection with real estate and the lack of land regulation, it's happening in Toronto as well. You'll get approved to rezone an area, which will increase dramatically the property value, and then kind of sit on it until, or you resell it. And so this idea of just land and home and housing becoming this commodity, right, where it's just it's all about making the most money, the biggest bang for your buck, and you'll either sit on a property and let it sit vacant, even though there's a homelessness crisis in Toronto, right? Because that's how you're going to earn more money as as a real estate investor. So those local policies, whether it's in the city or the province that regulate, we're about to put in a vacant homes tax in Toronto to help avoid that kind of sitting on vacant properties and kind of ultra capitalism, just sitting on land until it becomes valuable enough to resell somewhere else, so then someone else can live in it, right? But it's all connected, right? It's all of these things are connected, and sometimes it's hard to see how that's connected to the mold in your basement, but it is. It's like it's all connected in this like elaborate web of profiting off of housing. But in my organizing experience, the how you translate a bigger issue like the vacancy tax, right? How are you going to get a whole bunch of tenants to support a vacancy tax? That is important in organizing. So the messaging around that. But even it's easier to get a tenant association or tenants who are already organized to support different policies because that groundwork, that foundation has already been laid. In our experience, it's usually an elevator that's not working or a rent increase that people can't afford. That really that's the first thing that brings people together. And then building on, it's using that moment as a catalyst to build on for greater change and positive change. One tenant association just did like a holiday, decorate your door holiday contest, right? And that was, you were able to do those kinds of community building things because the tenant association was already formed and together. I don't know, I'm rambling now, but Grant, you made me think of a million different housing policies we've been pushing for in Toronto. One of them is the vacancy home tax. Other ones that the city of Vancouver, like the city of Vancouver put in the vacancy home tax, was able to generate, I think it was $40 million in tax revenue that they put into building affordable housing. So these are policies that are already happening in Canada too. Montreal has done some really progressive local planning policies that are helping to curb this housing crisis that we're seeing all over the country. So there are lessons to be learned at home, very close to home, about what tenant organizing has been able to push at a more policy level. But I gotta say, the very first step for that is finding out a way to talk to your neighbors. Like I will always go back to that and building that sense of you are not alone, we're stronger together, and when we work together, we win together. Those are, the vacancy tax didn't come because our mayor decided, hey, I want to start taxing my real estate buddies for vacant investments. No, it came because enough of us were talking to one another and organizing around this that happened. And it's always going to start. I'm a firm believer in the bottom up, those grassroots meetings like this, having conversations like this with each other. That's how we start to see that change happen. So mapping, if you have 350 people you can call, like Robin, that is, divide up that list between the 7 or 12 people up on this call and say, hey, thank you for signing that petition. It was so important. Here's the next step we're taking together as tenants. And whatever that next step is going to be, right? I can't tell you what that is, but I'm sure you can think of something.
We're having a discussion in our group in Charlottetown about there's kind of a core group that's been together for quite a while, and we've only recently started to have new members, I think. And hopefully with Connor on board and the publicity, we'll get more. But we're having a large discussion about communications and the role some people want to play in organizing. Others want to do communications, like get because thinking that as we grow, that'll become more and more important, and how to respond to the media. That's another thing we're doing a lot of discussing about. So what I've heard you say tonight is that person to person is very important.
It's the best kind of communication when it comes to organizing and building a strong foundation. I'm not like, media attention is important. Media attention will help, you know, perhaps reach more people, but that's always kind of the goal. Whenever I'm planning something from a strategy perspective, I'm always thinking, how can I have more conversations with my neighbors, right? So if it's like CBC in Charlottetown wants to have an article or wants to do a thing on housing, that's great, right? Then fantastic, you can reach a bunch more people. But I'm always thinking, okay, I want media attention in order to reach more people. Yes, to put pressure on politicians and all of those things, but the best way to put pressure on any of the powers that be, whether it's the corporate landlords, whether it's the politicians, whether it's, you know, development industries that are rewriting our laws, is, Andrew put it in the chat, is numbers. It's numbers. It's more of us coming together, and that's kind of always my end game, is how can we grow the movement. So getting a primetime slot on, you know, CBC National, great, or the 6 o'clock news is fantastic, but you want to make sure, and the pitch is, get in touch with the PEI housing for affordable housing, and this is the way you can do that, right? You want to make sure you add that pitch so that you have you're building that base. So the person, but I can't emphasize how important those person-to-person conversations are. I always, when I'm talking to someone again, I'm always like, oh, and hey, like, how can we keep in touch? What's your phone number? If I meet someone on the street, what's your phone number? Here's my, you know, let me text you so you have my number. And then that contact goes into that map, right? It's a systematic kind of process. So, you know, this person is from this neighborhood on this street. I've got their name and their phone number. So if one day we need to do a text blast because of an urgent action to protect someone who's getting evicted in that neighborhood, these are all the people we know who live there, who can, you know, we have their text message. We can text them right away. So yeah, grant media training and all of that is important, but perhaps what's even more important than that is being just a regular person talking to your neighbor. I find that's the most effective way of communicating.
You use the term urgent action. I've seen that associated with Amnesty International. And 30 years ago, we were writing letters for prisoners. We were part of Amnesty International at the university of Guelph. And my brother organized the urgent actions on campus, and you know, it worked. That was person to person. I wrote letters to Leonid Brezhnev. He was the leader of the Soviet Union at one time. And anyways, individual letters to individual leaders can make a difference, even the worst leaders.
Absolutely. There are so many actions that can be taken, and you're going to want to find what's going to be the most strategic for the moment. But an action is successful because you've got a number of people behind it, right? That's what we've found to be the most effective. Power in numbers, you know?
And I think also spreading knowledge, like informing people what's going on around them. That's very effective or very important.
Yep. I have an example of a flyer somebody received back in 2018, and they kept it and they put it on their fridge. And then when things got difficult for them because of COVID, you know, they reached out, and I always ask, you know, how did you hear about us? Oh, I had this flyer from ages ago, and it was kept on people's fridge. So that kind of like sharing information it can be an end goal in itself, just making sure tenants who live in Charlottetown, who live in PEI, know what their rights are when it comes to being a tenant, know what's allowed and what isn't. But again, in terms of building that movement, building that coalition, those numbers, thinking about how can I communicate this via sharing information while also trying to tie it to an action or something that will propel people into collective action. That's kind of always the way I try to think of things strategically. And people keep things on their fridges. I've been surprised. Keep them on their fridge. Connor, you look like you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, I was going to agree with the is this working?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to agree about the conversations. They're like the bread and butter sort of approach, and also that gets into like the idea for the next webinar next week is specifically like how to have those conversations, like how to have like the structured, purposeful conversation that really like this is find the issues, like, raise their expectations, like get the follow-ups and everything from there.
Highly recommend that training on the structured conversation, 100%. I mean, you have experience in canvassing, will be either on the phone or door knocking. It doesn't have to feel so scary. There's a formula and there's a structure that we like to follow, and I always like having that to fall back on when I'm doing calls, especially the first couple of times you get nervous. Now I love it. I'm so sad I can't knock on my neighbors' doors anymore because of COVID. I'm so sad. So now we're calling people, right? And it's not the same as the face-to-face, but you can still do those structured conversations and those one-to-one conversations. Absolutely. So I'm looking, who's doing that training? I want to be part of that training.
If you want, I haven't actually figured out who's going to do the speaking, but I've just like pieced it together from a bunch of different videos. There is actually, I heard back from the Vancouver Tenants Union that they're actually putting together a Slack of different tenant union organizations.
Oh, great.
So I might reach out in there. If you'd want to be part of the organizing conversation workshop, you're more than welcome.
I don't think I'm quite an expert enough to give that workshop, but it is definitely a workshop that I have enjoyed. I've taken myself, and that we fall back on that often. I would love to connect. Like, let's stay connected. I think the work that's happening, all across this country is so important, and the more we get to have conversations like this and learn from each other, I think the stronger we are. And I'll tell you, the landlords are having conversations with each other all over the country and discussing strategies, the best way to break things up and lobby this government over this government. So that's happening on the other side. So I'm really glad and so happy to be a part of these kinds of conversations on this side.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the chat.
Chiara is sometimes what the autocorrect does to my name.
Yeah, but I think that might be where, depending on how people feel, we usually end around hour and a half, just to keep it more like digestible for the recording.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm just adding our email in the chat, and we are having our tenant summit. It is like, it's local for the York South-Weston Tenant Union is who we are targeting to come. But if representatives from PEI wanted to be there just to participate and see, how we're trying to manage these, we're all learning with the online mass meetings. But you're welcome to send a couple representatives to tune in. And I will add the link for that also in the chat. EGM 2021. I think that'll work. But yeah, let's keep in touch. Keep me up to speed. Let me know what happens. And things that are working, things that are not working, right? This is how we learn from each other. So it was a pleasure to be part of this chat. I hope that we can keep in touch and keep up the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.